You can drive thousands of laps, build dozens of setups, even become a fast driver, and still not understand why the rear of the car behaves the way it does. Most people see the differential as another setup setting, something you can tweak when the car feels a bit nervous or lazy. But the differential is doing far more than that. Every time you release the brake, every time you coast, every time you squeeze the throttle, the differential decides how the rear tires work together. My name is Arnoud, I've been sim racing for years, have created my own car setup shop, created 2 car setup guides, and this is how I approach the differential. Let's get into it. Lower power gives more rotation, higher coast gives stability, more preload makes the car safer. Just copy what the fast guys use. And these are great statements, but they're forever changing in speed conditions. The differential isn't really a setup topic, it's a driver topic. Because what you're feeling isn't power, coast, or preload, but how the rear of your car actually acts out every time you hit the gas. Sometimes you feel the car is being stable, the other time you might lose it. And if you go through this video, you get a more in-depth understanding how that rear axle is helping you or betraying you. There are a few concepts you need to understand before we can move into the really juicy stuff of this video, and that is this grip circle. And that means that a tire can only do so much workload. So you can use it for full acceleration, you can use it for cornering, but if you use both of them, you have a great reduction of both of them. And if the tire is being stretched too much, so if you corner too hard and you hit the throttle too fast, then you spin the rear tires because it cannot produce the grip. And if you take a corner with a car and you're going through a corner, the inside wheel has a lower rotational speed than the outside wheel. And that's why we need a differential to create this difference. Now, to understand differential and how to tweak it and how to get the most pace out of the car, you need to understand that when you're standing still or you're going very slowly, we have this enormous engine in this hypercar, and if we hit the gas, we immediately push out the tires out of that grip circle. Like, the engine has so much power to push the car forwards, the tires cannot simply not comply with all that power. So it's being pushed out of the circle. Obviously, we have a TC system preventing this from spinning. So we have a very much acceleration limit on the rear tires. When we're already going faster, like 125 or 200, that acceleration starts to be reduced because of the downforce, because of rolling resistance and all that good stuff. So we can still hit full throttle, but the tires now are getting more in the window of our grip circle. And when we drive even faster, this is being reduced even more. So the rear tires are now in a safe window, but we're still full on the throttle. That didn't change, but the rear tires, they are in a great spot. We can actually corner the car hard now without losing the grip. This is a simplified graph on how you can look at it as well. The rear tire workload, how much grip it can produce. On the low speed, lots of power, lots of wheel spin, but then as the speed increases, workload drops, and speed increases, yeah? And the grip limit actually increases because of downforce and all that stuff. And by the way, I'm also going to talk about GT3s, yeah? This is not necessarily a hyper or downforce car comparison, but if you can understand the hypercars in Le Mans Ultimate, you'll understand basically the whole differential setting because it's such a great example. Now, your throttle feeling, your exit feeling, your entry feeling, it all depends on your differential settings in this speed state, in this speed state, in this speed state, what kind of gear you're in, how much power you apply, traction control, and the rest of the setup. If you can understand the different speed states of differential, then it starts to become an intuitive thing instead of memorization. If you're on a slow speed and you have a low power differential setting and you want to exit corners as you hit the throttle, the next phenomenon is gonna occur. Because we have load transfer, we have this tire being loaded up because of the load transfer, and this tire is being unloaded. Now, if I hit the gas with a low power differential, it means that this tire is now spinning up and leaving the grip circle due high acceleration, and the outside tire, which is loaded, is in the grip circle. What does this do? Well, it creates an environment where you can hit the gas and the car kind of stays in check on the exit in slow corners, and you have a TC interference pushing back this tire into the grip circle, and you find a element of understeer when you have this phenomenon. So how does this work on out? Well, low power differential means it's open. Open differential means the tires are allowed to rotate under different speeds. So the lower the differential power, the more open the differential is, the more rotational differences these rear tires can have. When you hit then the gas, it's following the route of the least resistance. And that resistance is going to be important later. So let's talk about the path of least resistance. This tire wants to spin up, but we keep traction, and it's a safe thing. The downsides of it, obviously, if we have very low differential power on a slow speed, we could have potential high TC interference, which really hurts our launch on our slow corner exit. So an example of this, if you have Monza, turn 1 and 2, a low differential power could be a little bit painful on the exits. What if we use the same differential setting at this state of speed? So it was kind of giving us up and down sides in the low speeds with the wheel spin and stuff, but what about higher speeds? It's better, right? Like I explained before, if we have more speed in the car, we don't spin up the inner tire anymore because of acceleration, because now we have the downforce and we have the drag in the car, and we have like rolling resistance and all that stuff. So now the engine isn't powerful enough anymore to make the inner unloaded wheel spin up, and we have an actual condition of rotation. Because we're hitting the throttle and we have the differential being open, the rear wants to move freely. Because the rear tires, as we are on the throttle, are operating freely. Think about it. If we have a long corner and we have high speed and this wheel is allowed to move in a different rotational speed compared to this one, then there's no blocking of you corner the car. So you turn the wheel and the rear just answers to you, all right, let's take the corner. At this speed, 175 to 50, and I would even argue going higher, aerodynamics are playing a huge part in your balance as well. So at some point, if you have a safe aerodynamic balance, I think that the differential low can be safe under high speed. However, if you're driving a very challenging rake, so you have a forward-facing aerodynamic platform, then that low power differential could be considered to be very dangerous, because we have such a compliant and like alive rear end with these open or differential like the low setting. So you can see how the differential is connected to the rest of the setup as well. Wouldn't it be great if you just had like some setups that would give you layers of aggression, and you would have like the rake and a differential and the spring setup all set up in a way that like it feels more aggressive or more safe and gives you a predictable car every time you go on track? Well, if you want that, it's in the description. Skill level setups. Level 5, super challenging, very challenging on the throttle and off the throttle. But level 1, like mega safe and gives you that planted field. Hundreds and hundreds of people already gotten a package, which I'm forever grateful for. And I'm actually using these myself all the time. Link in the description. Let's go back and use a high power differential setting. So it's going to be more closed in this same condition. A little bit of a side note here. I'm taking a lot of time to explain you this power differential, and then we're gonna do the coast. After you understand that, preload is like explained in a minute. Like immediately know what preload does and how it works for GT3s as well. So let's keep going. So when we exit a slow corner again, but now we're using a high power differential setting, meaning we have a locked or closed differential, now all of a sudden the unloaded tire cannot spin up because it's connected to this one. And what tends to happen as we have pressure on this wheel, we have a better drive off, a better exit. But we also lack rotational freedom as soon as we hit the gas full throttle on a slow corner. And what tends to happen is we might speed up with a lot of understeer, but then what tends to happen is that because we have the understeer, we tend to turn the wheel more because we kind of understeering to the exit. And then because of some inertia and the car actually getting into some cornering behavior because you are forcing the steering wheel, then all of a sudden the rear tire decides, you know what, if you are going to push me into acceleration and cornering, I'll let go. Goodbye, I'm not doing this. And then the rear snaps. And this is the kind of snap, when you go aggressive on power, this is the kind of snap you don't feel coming. Like, it's gone. And especially when it gets rainy conditions, this gets even worse. So how can we overlay these two power settings? If we have a locked diff, then we get the snap. So it takes some time, there is some understeer, but then snap and you lose it on the exit. And if you have a low power diff, this is a more nuanced and you kind of feel it coming, but you might also lack rotation at some point. And this is definitely not a perfect graph, but it just shows how a high power differential gives you the snap. And this is on the slow corners, by the way. I created a graph that you can see how this could work. So for instance, if you have the power lock differential, okay, so these values aren't really accurate, but it shows an idea. When you change the power differential, how much lock, like if you have high power, you can see how it's kind of starts to snap oversteer. But if you do it lower, you get more of this effect. So think about this thing in your brain as when you're changing the power and the lock differential under throttle. When we encounter fast corners and we have a higher power differential, we get a condition of understeer and stability. Because when we have a fast corner and we hitting the throttle, now we have some locking on the rear axle preventing us from turning the wheel. So with an open diff, with a low power setting, you would say like, I'm turning the wheel, and the rear would say, yes, let's turn. But now the rear says, nah, let's keep going in a straight line. Turning the wheel and hitting the gas in fast corners could give you a great element of understeer. And under high speed, we don't get the snap again because we simply do not have enough power to push the rear tires out of the grip circle. So the high power differential only gives a snap in the slow corners, not in the fast ones. A very important note on preventing snap oversteer is going to be, how do you prevent this? And you prevent this sudden snap with short shifting. So it means you take the RPM and you hit the gas full throttle, and then all of a sudden you start pushing out the tire out of the grip circle because of the high torque in the low gears, mind you, slow corners. But then before that actually happens, you shift gears and you're pushing the tire back into the window, which allows you to not lift. And this is important for, let's say, an Aston Martin GT3 and Le Mans Ultimate, that you short shift from 1 to 2 and then you manually just prevent that snap and you can enjoy that high power acceleration out of the exit. Now we're going to release the throttle and now we are under differential coast conditions. And let's start with a high differential coast setting. This means we have locking, the rear tires are not allowed to move under different rotational speeds. So whenever you start cornering as you release the throttle, the rear tires actually don't want the car to corner, because you can see these arrows, right? They are equal. We're taking this long corner, we're releasing the throttle, we're using the steering wheel, but these tires are just preventing the rear to come around. So you say to the car, I want a corner, but the rear says, let's keep going in a straight line as much as possible. This creates very safe entries as you release the throttle. But there is an element of braking, obviously, we need to consider. So if we are running a very aggressive brake bias, for instance, very much braking on the rear, releasing the brakes at this point with the high differential coast could give you back a lot of stability when you overdo your trail braking. So it's a very safe thing, but you will notice that you have to steer the car a lot if you don't touch the throttle. If we lower the coast value, meaning we have a more open differential, we create an environment that once we release the throttle and we start to steer, then the rear says, okay, let's go, let's take that corner. There's such a big difference between coasting and throttle because we have also load transfer to consider. So now we're releasing the throttle and load shifts forward, meaning we unload both tires. And if we use a too low differential setting, the rear can become so loose that we just lose the rotation. Now with hypercars, it's an interesting thing because we can still have the aerodynamic stability, which still creates a safe entry under faster corners. But once we go slowly and the car starts to lose its aerodynamics, but we still have the load transfer, now all of a sudden that low differential coast starts to push us into a slow corner spin. And this is what I really recommend for beginners for hypercars in Le Mans Ultimate, is that you go with a high coast, not a low coast, because this will catch you out. Now what you can do, let's imagine you approach the corner like this with a certain coast differential setting and you're trail braking and you have this like curve that you're taking as you're entering the corner. You're releasing the throttle and you're trail braking. Maybe you would stop here trail braking or only do like a tiny bit of braking, and you will have some understeer here, right? You want the car to be more cornering, but it's just not happening, and you just want to force your front wheels to make the corner, which kind of stops you, which wears the front tires. You want more rotation. If you start lowering the coast and you are trail braking and you're releasing the throttle, then you might have this sudden edge on how the car wants to rotate. But if you overdo this, then you could spin into oversteer as you release the throttle. One thing that helps sometimes is retouch the throttle again, then you get some load transfer more again to the rear tires, and you're back into your power differential setting, which might stabilize the rear again. But this technique is something that it's really hard to do. So sometimes touching the throttle a little bit can help you to restabilize the car and get away with more aggressive coast differential values to like rotate the car more freely. Let's imagine you taking this chicane like this, and when you have a high coast differential, you kind of like want to coast somewhere here around this part. You're maybe trail braking over here as well, but the curvature of your car that it can produce, it's not really giving you the great exit. You still need to do lots of cornering here on the exit. So this is really painful with high coast differential. If you have more coast and you release the throttle, you can maybe rotate the car a lot better here and have a better launch off in the exit. And this is what you do with differential. You're changing the shapes of these lines. Let's the part of like entry is going to be coast, and the exit part over here on top is more about the power differential. So these are some example of differential presets from my hypercar guide. For instance, you have aggressive, might have like more power and like a coast value and the preload. And yeah, have a look on these. These are, take this with a nuance. Some cars are really not that safe with 20% on the power, but you could offset this with more TC, like it's over here, more TC, interference, slower exit, rotation at speed. It depends a little bit on the car. Now let's talk about preload, finally. Now preload becomes super easy to understand at this point. And let me explain why. So think about preload as a timer to your coast and power differential. So for instance, if I go super low, 0 preload, now it means that if I hit the power, I get a very quick shift to this 20% differential setting. As soon as I release the throttle now, then I'm going to go very quickly to my 65% differential setting. So if you understand what coast does and what power differential does, with 0 preload, we get a very sudden shift between these two values. But when we go super high on the preload and we release, let's say we were full throttle, on the straight line and we start the corner and release the throttle, then there is simply more force needed to push these rotational speeds into this 65% coast value. So there is basically damper or a like time constraint on us pushing us to this 65% value. Now obviously preload is about this like clutch plates into these differential, and I wouldn't know how it's actually mechanically working, but this is basically how I look at preload. And preload, yes, it makes the car safer on the entry, but it creates more of a snap on the power. For instance, like I explained before, on this car particularly, I run a power differential of 20%, but with a significant, like decent amount of preload, the initial throttle input is still kind of safe. But then as it takes longer, as I corner more, we get to this power differential, which allows me to have a nice rotating car. Also for the coast value, if I would go release the throttle, I have a bit of time before we go to this coast 65%. If I go very low on the preload, I'm immediately on the 65%, and when I enter a fast corner, this might feel too aggressive. So think about the preload as an equalizer of strength that pushes you to the power and coast value. And now if you are on a GT3 car, you cannot change these two. These two are fixed. So we only have the preload to consider. When you drive under the limit, or you're not really into the limits of what the car actually can do, you might not really feel these things. But if you're in the edge and you're pushing the car and you want to brake as late as possible, or you want to go on the throttle as early as you can, you start seeing these nuances in your differential, and you should definitely consider changing these. A way to exercise preload, for instance, go super high. When you go max preload, we have a lot of like aiming towards a lock differential. So we get the understeer snap, we get the entry stability, and yeah, we basically have a rear axle that isn't that compliant. You can test out a softer front anti-roll bar or softer front springs with this type of preload. But what you also can do is go the complete other way around and stiffen up the front axle and the front anti-roll bar, maybe even reduce a little bit of rake, and now you get a different feeling in the car because we have this open differential. The last thing, and definitely the most important thing, there isn't really a right or wrong answer here. It's very personal taste and dependent. But yeah, I hope this video will give you a real deep understanding on how the preload and the differential works. Now, if you want to build your own car setups for GT3s or hypercars, you can either pick one of these two videos. This one is to build hypercars, this one is to build GT3 cars in Le Mans Ultimate. Thanks for watching. Pick one. These are good videos. This one especially is super underrated. It's gonna explain a lot of stuff in aerodynamics and all that beautiful things. See you there. Come on, click it.